Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our December 14th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Zach Bader, and today's episode celebrates the 60th anniversary of the Japan Hog Lift, an act of Iowa kindness that helped create a lasting relationship between our state and Japan. And of course, that relationship also means a lot to U.S. agriculture as a whole, with Japan becoming such a strong market for U.S. ag exports. So today we'll talk with Iowa Farm Bureau President Craig Hill about the importance of Iowa's unique and ongoing relationship with Japan, which is something that he got to see firsthand during a Farm Bureau trip to Japan back in 2016. And then we'll bring on Dan Halstrom, who's the president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and we'll talk about how things currently stand with one of America's most important trade partners. We'll start with President Hill. Spokesman editor Dirk Steimel takes it from here.
Today we're visiting with Iowa Farm Bureau President Craig Hill to discuss the 60th anniversary of the Japan Hog Lift. In late 1960, Iowa farmers and ag leaders arranged to transport 36 breeding hogs, along with 100,000 bushels of corn, to the Japanese province of Yamanashi after its agriculture was devastated by two typhoons. Craig, why was the Japan Hog Lift so important, and why does it still resonate today in Japan and in Iowa after 6 decades?
Well, Dirk, the single act of kindness and generosity from compassionate Iowa farmers helped halfway around the world a desperate population that had been ravaged by natural disaster. It was very meaningful. It was a major impact on our two countries' relationship and the beginning of a friendship, most specifically in Iowa, for Iowa and the Yamanashi prefecture.
What does the Hog Lift say about people in agriculture helping one another after weather tragedies or any other tragedies, whether they are in Iowa or in Japan or anywhere else in the world?
Well, I believe that people with rural roots, farmers, producers, and agriculture from around the world share a common bond. We know that people must eat. We as farmers can't fail. We feel a sense of responsibility, despite whatever Mother Nature may throw at you when something so devastating as two typhoons destroys years of work. Farmers know that we need to come together to help, and we do.
So in 2016, Craig, you joined a group of Iowa Farm Bureau leaders to visit Japan and spend a few days in Yamanashi. How were the Farm Bureau leaders received in Japan, and particularly in Yamanashi?
But we were welcomed with open arms, both by government officials there, but also the population in general. What we learned while we were there is those 36 breeding animals that were delivered from Iowa's farms had grown to 500 breeding animals in just a few years. But in less than a decade, those 36 have become greater than 500,000 head of swine in Yamanashi prefecture. And today, the vast majority of the pigs in Yamanashi are progeny from Iowa farms. That's a remarkable story.
During the trip, how did the people in Yamanashi commemorate the Hog Lift?
Well, we had, an embassy visit in which the U.S. ambassador to Japan, Caroline Kennedy, actually visited with us about this event and how the relationships have been built over the years as a result of that. We had a number of conversations with folks that had read or heard about and were reminiscing about that event and what impact it had to their population.
The 1960 Hog Lift helped spark the first sister state relationship between an American state and a Japanese province, or prefecture as they're often called. Why are relations like that so important?
Well, it's just an amazing thing that a single act of kindness, what it can do to create enduring and lasting relationships between two countries. Our family has hosted numerous Japanese farmers to our farm. Countless exchanges and delegations have traveled back and forth over the many years. The story of the Hog Lift is shared in books. seeds of kindness can bear fruit for a lifetime, and it's an incredible story.
Today, Japan is a very important customer for Iowa-raised pork, for corn, for beef, and other products. Do you think the ties built by the Japan Hog Lift are partly responsible for that?
I believe that to be true. Japan, over the many years, has become either our number one, number two, or number three market for pork and beef and corn. It's a very strong, reliable market for us. In Japan, there's 126 million folks that have very limited natural resources within that country's geography, a country just the size of California. So I think for centuries to come, this relationship will bear fruit.
You know, it's really incredible to think that we started with just 36 Iowa hogs in the Yamanashi prefecture 60 years ago. And now, as Craig said, we know that the vast majority of hogs in Yamanashi have a lineage that traces back to Iowa. It's really just incredible. And of course, that's just one example of the ripple effect that can come from a small act of kindness. Another example is the trade relationship that has been built between the U.S. and Japan over time. For that, we send it back to Dirk, who's now with U.S. Meat Export Federation President and CEO, Dan Halstrom.
We're visiting today with Dan Halstrom, President and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. A native of Cherokee in northwest Iowa, Dan joined USMEF in 2010 after nearly 3 decades in the meat industry. Dan, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Japan Hog Lift here in Iowa. It was in late 1960 when farmers and ag leaders arranged for 36 breeding hogs and 100,000 bushels of corn to be shipped to Japan to help that country recover from 2 terrible typhoons. That generosity helped to build a strong relationship between Japan and the United States, and particularly between Japan and Iowa. Why are those kinds of relationships so valuable as we work to market U.S. meat products around the world?
I think you hit on it. Any time you have a business relationship, relationships are the key. And it's really the case when you're dealing with Asia and more specifically with Japan. I mean, we've been dealing in Japan as an industry on beef and pork for decades, for probably better than 50 years. And it's that buyer and seller relationship that's so important, but it really goes deeper. I mean, it's about country relationships, and in the case of Iowa, state relationship that's been developed over the years. So, having a comfort level with who you're dealing with and an understanding of the products that they produce, the safety and integrity and quality of those products are all key attributes that, something like the Hog Lift, years ago, the 60th anniversary, was really a great way to get this relationship started. And we're seeing the fruits of it in the results today.
So, as you mentioned, Japan's a good market for U.S. pork, beef, and other ag products. Why is U.S. pork and beef so popular in Japan?
Well, I think there's several reasons. I think number one, safety and integrity. I think the Japanese market understands over the years has really come to understand our production processes and a high level of quality and integrity that comes with it. So that's kind of the foundation of your house, so to speak. If you don't have that, you don't do business in Japan. Then from there, it becomes more of a comfort level with the people you're dealing with, and the state of Iowa, is one of the best in doing that, and one of the largest suppliers of pork in particular, but beef as well. And over the years, there's different programs that have gotten established, and like I said, 60 years in running. That's how long it's taken to really develop this business. And Japan, until this year, has been the largest market for U.S. beef and pork. Pork will be number 2 this year in 2020 because of the situation in China, which is a bit of an anomaly with African swine fever. But I would say consistently the largest destination for U.S. beef and pork exports has been Japan, and we expect that to continue.
Earlier this year, the United States and Japan entered a trade agreement. How has that trade agreement affected U.S. red meat exports to Japan?
I am the biggest fan of that U.S. Japan ag agreement. If it's not the biggest deal ever for U.S. beef and pork producers, I would say it's definitely the biggest deal since BSE hit in 2003 in the U.S. We were at a severe disadvantage prior to that in 2018 and 19. Severe disadvantage because a lot of our competitors entered the TPP agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the U.S. opted not to join that, and instead to work a bilateral agreement, which ended up working out just fine, but it took some time. And the implementation date was January 1, 2020 for the U.S.-Japan Ag Agreement. And this was our replacement for what we thought was going to be the TPP. This was huge. We had a 13% duty disadvantage for U.S. beef going into Japan in 2019, and when we hit January 1 earlier this year in 2020, we were on the same playing field as Australia, as Canada, as Mexico on the beef side. And the pork side had a similar issue, maybe not as big of a duty disadvantage, but two different sections of pork had a disadvantage. One was ground seasoned pork, where we were at about a 7% duty disadvantage. We became equal to our major competitors, which was European Union, Canada, and Mexico. And then also on fresh pork, the variable levy duty implication, we were about a 2% duty disadvantage for fresh and frozen pork. So on both species, this was just a huge positive impact for the U.S. beef and pork industries. And I'm happy to report that 11 or 10 months into the year, as far as our export stats are concerned, January through October export stats this year would indicate that we have about a 3% gain in market share in beef, mainly at the expense of Australia. And we have about a 2.5% market share increase on total pork, mainly at the expense of Europe. And on the ground seasoned pork side, the increase is even more dramatic. We're up about 25% year on year, just because of those changes on the duties and getting us on a level playing field. So very, very big deal, a very, very important deal for the U.S. and Iowan beef and pork producers.
Well, let's talk about pork exports in general. They've been very strong in 2020 despite the global pandemic. What factors are behind that strong demand for U.S. pork?
Well, I think it starts with a couple of things. Number one is that the country of Japan is 50% self-sufficient at best for pork production. So their demand is far outstripping their supply. This is nothing new. This has been the case for decades. Although I think that that gap is widening and the dependence on imports continues to increase as their demand increases. So that's a very base level of driver. But I think if you look at the higher level of demand on pork specifically, they're wanting safety, they're wanting quality, and the U.S. is one of the highest standards on both. So I think you combine all this together. Part of the reason their consumption and their business is growing over there is because of their ability to import. The other key thing that drives our business is that traditionally a lot of the imports are frozen. The European Union being our largest competitor on the frozen pork side. But one of the real drivers in growth has been the chilled market, vacuum packed, chilled, never frozen product that's sent from the U.S. over to Japan. And a lot of this goes directly into what we call the table meat market or into the consumer ready market at retail. And this particular segment is growing by leaps and bounds. And our competitors there, of course, our main competitor is Japan domestic pork, but the imported competitors would be primarily Canada and Mexico. And the European Union's not able to ship chilled pork by vessel. So these are the drivers and these are the aspects that are really where the majority of the growth is, if you look at it from a very high level.
And then when you look around the world, what factors are supporting pork exports worldwide?
I think pork is a very versatile protein. So we're seeing per capita consumption growth rates around the world grow and far outstripping the supply. Japan's one example, but you've got other places. You've got Korea, Mexico, Central and South America. One of the largest percentage growth rate countries in the world for U.S. pork is Colombia. And they have their own domestic pork industry, but once again, their demand far outstrips their ability to supply themselves. So this is really the mantra across the world: is taking product from the countries that have the grain. I mean, the U.S. has a very ample supply of grain where we're able to use it as feed for livestock. And a lot of other parts of the world do not. Asia is a classic example. They have to import their grain. They're not nearly as efficient, nor do they have the space for the production. So these are all advantages that the U.S. in particular can use to maximize the business opportunity globally with a lot of these markets. So I think you add that all up, and it's a really good story for the U.S. Beef and pork industries.
And why is export demand so important for livestock farmers here in Iowa and all over the country?
Well, it's about the math. It's about adding value. It's real basic. In any business, it's always pretty much better to have more customers rather than less. So if you're a row crop farmer that has livestock, the ability to export corn is very important, but the ability to export meat from livestock that you're raising diversifies your portfolio. So I think in that aspect, the ability to export livestock through meat it's a growing area, and it's about maximizing that value per head. So if you look at, I'll give you the most recent numbers. The contribution you look at the beef side, you're over $300 per head slaughtered. Increase in value due to the exports of beef globally. On the pork side, it varies a bit, but it's right in that $50 to $60 range as well. Year to date this year on the pork side, we're looking at real close to $50 per head for every pig animal slaughtered. So, it's about putting the right cut in a right market to maximize value. So I'll give you a pretty good example. Pork and beef variety meats. There's some demand in the U.S., but for the most part, if you're looking at pork tongues or beef tripe or pork intestines, not a real big demand item in the U.S. Well, there's a lot of markets around the world where that's a delicacy and much preferred. So you see the exporters and the packers, they're sending a lot of the beef and pork variety meats outside the U.S. to maximize the value of what they can get in the U.S. So this is really the beauty of it, is to put the right cut in the right market to maximize that total carcass value.
Looking ahead to 2021, what's the outlook for pork and beef and exports as we look forward?
Well, let's start with beef. Beef this year in 2020, we're forecasting to be down just slightly from 2019. It's going to be in the neighborhood of probably 3% down. But the good news is that we're seeing the fourth quarter of this year, of which we just got the October stats today. We're up significantly year on year for the month of October on beef, or up a couple percent. But our forecast is for the 2021 for a robust rebound, as we see a lot of these countries around the world emerge from the COVID-19 impacts where food service has been shut down. U.S. beef is a big item at food service globally. So we're seeing forecasts for rebounds in Mexico, Korea. Japan's already starting to show growth the fourth quarter of this year. So we see that extending into 2021, and our forecast for 2021 is about 10% growth on the beef side versus 2020. On the pork side, this year, 2020 is going to be a record by far. A lot of that is due to the large volumes going into China with their African swine fever situation domestically. We do see the rate of growth slowing down in 2021 as they start to repopulate in China. So our growth, we're still going to see, we think, another new record in 2021 with growth of between 2 and 3% is our forecast right now. So China will drop down. There'll still be a big year, but not nearly as big as 2020. But we see other markets like Japan, like Mexico, like Korea, like Central America. We see other markets picking up the slack on the pork side in 2021.
We definitely appreciate Dan making time to join us on the podcast. I know that 2020 has been an especially tough year on those of you who raise livestock, so it's good to hear Dan talk about the positive outlook for U.S. meat exports as we look into 2021 and beyond. Okay, as we start to wrap up this episode of the podcast, I want to bring your attention to a few unique opportunities we're offering farmers and ag professionals over the next several weeks. The first opportunity is a series of webinars that we're offering Iowa Farm Bureau members in place of in-person experts that we typically bring to Iowa Farm Bureau's annual meeting. That series includes a look at lessons learned by restaurants, grocery stores, and livestock farmers while responding to COVID-19, as well as future projections by economists and other ag experts. The series is going on right now, and you can learn more at iowafarmbureau.com. The second opportunity that's going on right now is a chance to show your support for 10 young ag entrepreneurs who are competing for cash prizes up to $7,500 in Iowa Farm Bureau's Grow Your Future Award competition. December 17th is the deadline to go out and vote for your favorite ag entrepreneur, and again, you can head out to iowafarmbureau.com to do that. Looking ahead into early 2021, we're really excited to be offering an Economic Summit webinar series for you. That series is going to begin in mid-January, and it's going to feature a wide range of national experts. You're going to hear a lot more about that in upcoming podcast episodes, and of course, check out those details on iowafarmbureau.com. We also encourage you to stay tuned for our latest announcements regarding the updated plans for Iowa Farm Bureau's 2021 Young Farmer Conference. That's another topic we'll be talking about in upcoming podcast episodes, and as with everything else, you can find the very latest at iowafarmbureau.com. With that, I'll wrap up this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. Our next regularly scheduled episode is December 28th, and we hope that you'll join us for that. In the meantime, the Spokesman Speaks team and all of us at the Iowa Farm Bureau would like to wish you and your families a Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season. Thanks for doing the work that inspires everything that we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau. And thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.